The Trump Organization and the company's chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, have been charged with an alleged scheme stretching back to 2005 to, quote, compensate Weisselberg and other Trump Organization executives in a manner that was off the books. And the indictment carries a lot more than that. Joining us now to talk about this and more, attorney George Conway, contributing columnist at the Washington Post. It's nice to have you.
Thanks for having me.
I think the way that John put it this morning that I thought was very appropriate was a smoking spreadsheet. Because there is a lot here, and there are two books, and there is a pattern, and there's 15 years. What's your takeaway?
Right, that's absolutely correct. I mean, we saw the Trump Organization lawyer going out in front of the courthouse yesterday saying, oh, well, fringe benefits, it's complicated, it's not clear, taxes, it's not clear. This is way over the line, and that spreadsheet is absolutely a smoking spreadsheet. Keeping two sets of books. I mean, the spreadsheet was basically keeping track of how much compensation he was receiving off the books so that he wouldn't be overpaid, but not reporting it to the IRS or to New York State tax authorities. And two sets of books is actually what the overall investigation is about as well. The overall investigation, which is much larger than this issue, is apparently looking into questions about whether or not the Trump Organization was sending one set of valuations for its properties to tax authorities and yet another set of more inflated evaluations to insurance companies and to banks for lending and insurance purposes. So this is a very, very serious allegation of corruption, and it brings up to mind the case of Leona Helmsley back in 1989. And maybe people may not be old enough to remember that, like I am. But what happened there was that she was renovating her house out in Connecticut. And she basically was using company money to do it and creating false invoices to do it. And she stiffed the contractors. And the contractors got mad, so they sent a pile of invoices to the New York Post. And, well, there was a lo and behold, a story about how she's evading taxes, and Rudy Giuliani ended up prosecuting her. Wow. And one guy, there's another real estate mogul, Donald J. Trump, went out and said that Leona Helmsley was a disgrace to humanity.
Yeah, he danced all over the indictments,
absolutely,
as it were in this case. No small irony there. The Trump Organization is a family business.
Right.
In the Trump Organization also named this indictment. This is the former president's family business being hauled before the courts and charged with crimes. And I don't think that should be lost on people. But based on what you saw, I think this is worse for Alan Weisselberg than everyone was expecting.
Absolutely.
The question, though, is could it or can it be tied to Donald Trump? What are the chances, and you've got some personal experience with this, that Donald Trump was completely oblivious to this alleged tax scheme going on in his company?
Well, I mean, my personal experience is limited to the fact that I bought an apartment once from the Trump Organization on the East Side. And one of the things that happened when I signed the contract is I sent multiple copies of the contract over to the lawyers, and the lawyers sent them back to me. And lo and behold, Donald J. Trump's signature was on it. And as we later learned through press reports, I mean, he paid attention, very close attention to what went on in his business. He paid attention to these contracts. He paid attention to what checks were being written. And in fact, the indictment says that he actually cut a couple of the checks that went to paying off Weisselberg's expenses. And the thing to remember about the Trump Organization, which everyone knows and it's been well reported, is it really was it still is a small organization. And not too many people actually are involved in the major aspects of the business. And so that's the question, is whether or not the prosecutors could prove criminal intent as to something that may have been misreported. And for that, they probably would need an insider, since he doesn't use email and he doesn't, so that's where Weisselberg comes in.
And even then, given, as you rightly point out, the lack of documentation, no email, rips up calendars, et cetera, even if you were to have that person, may it be Weisselberg or someone else, to say there was intentionality here, a pattern of it over years, even then, it's still difficult, is it not?
Yeah, it's still difficult because, again, the prosecution has to prove, in any case, evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. Right. And here you're proving criminal intent, what's going on in somebody's mind. So that's why, again, documents can play a big role here. The documents, as for Weisselberg, seem to have him dead to rights. But and they also apparently may have testimony of the controller who worked for Weisselberg. And in the case of Trump, you probably need somebody who's talked to Trump. and about these matters and can say, yeah, well, he knew exactly what was going on, and that would be Alan Weisselberg, which explains the focus on him.
How uncomfortable will this be for the former president, the children, the Trump children, by the way, who are running the company? How uncomfortable will this be for them over the next 12 months?
Well, if I were, owned a small family business with a small number of people, and I'm in business, we're under criminal investigation, I'd be very, very worried. And then there are questions about whether or not these practices of keeping two sets of books for purposes of paying people were extended to other people. There's apparently a suggestion that it was. And the question is whether they extended to the family. I mean, there were reports about, I think in the New York Times, that Ivanka Trump received consulting fees for matters that it wasn't clear she was actually involved in, and maybe that was an attempt to avoid gift tax. Who knows?
I want to move on to another subject, but before I do, I want to play one final game of what if. What if it was the Clinton Foundation?
Oh my gosh, if it were the Clinton Foundation, could you imagine? I mean, the Republicans and Donald J. Trump in particular would say, oh, she's a disgrace to humanity and lock her up, lock her up, lock her up. I mean, there's no question. And it's not a question of politics here. This stuff is clearly illegal. If the facts that are specifically, very specifically pleaded in this indictment are proven, somebody's got to go to jail.
All right. Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader, CNN reported, threatened to pull committee assignments from any Republican who accepted Nancy Pelosi naming them on this select committee to investigate the January 6th insurrection. This is the same Kevin McCarthy who has not stripped committee assignments from Paul Gosar, who cozies up to Holocaust deniers, or Marjorie Taylor Greene. He didn't want to pull her committee assignment for Jewish space laser conspiracies. But if you join the select committee, I'm going to pull your committee assignment. Right. What is he afraid of, George?
The truth. He's afraid of the truth. He doesn't want to get to the truth. They said when they refused to vote for the impeachment of Donald Trump for inciting an insurrection, as we saw on television, they said, oh, we have to have an investigation. Then there's a bill that goes to Congress for a bipartisan investigation where half the members would be Republican and half the members are Democrat. They vote against that because they didn't want an investigation. And now they say, oh, we can't have a select committee because we have to have a bipartisan investigation, which of course they voted down. The answer is they don't want the truth. And the reason why they don't want the truth is because they are themselves implicated. They are implicated because they perpetuated and acceded to the big lie. And they basically created a situation where a large portion of the Republican electorate believes in the big lie. And it's because of them for not standing up to the big lie. And as a result, they want this to go away. But the problem is it can't go away. It's not going to go away. As long as these people are out there believing these lies, we're stuck with this. And for all, 30, I don't know, some 20, 30%, I don't know, some percentage of the population believes this. And they may even believe, for example, that Donald Trump will be reinstated in August. I mean, there's still the potential for violence, as I think you were probably discussing earlier.
Yeah, with Jay Johnson. I mean,
Yeah.
it is a very, very real, present, continuing threat to America. Yet Kevin McCarthy's paid advisor told me last night on the program, Americans don't care about this anymore.
Well,
I mean,
Americans
that is
do
a
care about it,
scary
but
point
it
of
may
view.
not be the Americans that they are trying to please.
You wrote a really interesting opinion piece in the Post, and the headline is America owes thanks to Trump's lawyers, even William Barr. Let me read people part of it if they haven't read it yet. To be sure, Barr's rectitude that day doesn't excuse his earlier kowtowing to Trump or his politicization of the Justice Department. But then you go on to say, not attempting to destroy constitutional democracy would seem to be a low standard for members of the bar, and it is. But the importance of these lawyers' refusal to behave lawlessly in the waning days of the Trump presidency can't be overstated.
I think
So he finally did right.
He finally did right, and I think it has to do, and the point I was trying to make in this piece was it has to do with the nature of being a lawyer. Lawyers can be tendentious, they can be argumentative, they can push. A lot of them may push the boundaries of what is reasonably arguable, and I think that's what William Barr did in a number of circumstances where he really particularly shouldn't have, because he owed a duty to the public to tell the truth.
I was just going to say, isn't there a difference
Yeah,
between a corporate
is.
lawyer and a
There is. But
AG?
in this one case, they did something that mattered. Not just him, but the people he left behind in the Justice Department. They refused to go along with the big lie. And there are consequences for lawyers. Live in an environment where they have to prove things. They have to cite cases. And at the end of the day, they didn't want to litigate this because they knew it was all made up. And if you make stuff up and you lie about facts in litigation, you get your license pulled.
See, Rudy Giuliani.
Exactly. And that's the point I was making, is that the legal culture at its best draws some bright lines here. I mean, there are gray areas when you get up to the bright line, but absolutely just making up facts is something that will get your license pulled and will disgrace you and will ruin your career as a lawyer.
See, I thought you were sticking up for Bill Barr just because you were worried that you were becoming too popular with the left, and you were trying to remind people you were, a conservative lawyer.
No, I mean, I've said some things about Bill Barr in the past.
Very interesting speech. George, it's great to have you here.
Thanks for
Thanks
having
so
me.
much for joining us.
Thanks
Really
for making
appreciate
the
it.
trip.